One of the ways I found myself talking to priests recently, so priests are a really defeated lot. You may or may not know that. People are leaving the church. You may or may not know that. And so it's easy to get really discouraged in an analogous way that parents get discouraged, right? So you see things happen around you. Your kids come home from school and things happen and you can just feel like, oh my gosh, we don't have a chance. What are we doing? Maybe you can or can't relate to that. I think you can. That's very much in a priest's mind. And so I'm trying to help priests understand when the Lord sends you to a parish, like God's not nervous. He has no rival. He's crushed the enemy. Crushed the enemy. And in a similar kind of way with you, I just feel like God wants to do the same thing tonight. Through practical, pastoral, psychological, developmental input that Tim will give us, which is spot on, and through some, what I hope is both practical and spiritual wisdom that I want to share with you that, I just feel like God wants to share with us. So let me do this real quick. We've done this a lot. For those of you who are in the parish throughout Holy Week and then kind of the days that we're leading into Holy Week, but let me recap something quickly because I think this helps build a foundation, and then it gives you something like the confidence to go forward to lead your children in the way that you want to lead your kids, or you wouldn't be here tonight. So we look around, we see the world, and we just kind of go, wow, how did it get this bad? Like, we're in a mess. What's the explanation for this? And the explanation is startlingly simple. And the explanation is that the good God, who made everything that he made out of love. Tim's going to talk a lot about that when he starts talking about how to talk to children about sexuality. So everything he makes out of love. But one of the things that he makes out of love chooses to rebel against God. And he chooses to rebel against God because of his envy of us. So this creature, which was an angel, which was created good, decides to go to war, not against God. He knows he's a creature. He can't compete with God. But against you and me. And that's the story that we read in Genesis 3, which is told in an inspired, poetic way. And so this creature who goes to war against you and me goes to war by deception. He lies. And as a result of the deception which happens in Genesis 3, which we call the fall, the human race sells itself into slavery. That was his game. And the first result of the fall is a distortion of sexuality. That's the first thing. Remember Adam and Eve, they eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the first thing that happens, Scripture says, is, and their eyes were opened, and they realized they were naked, right? And immediately before this, the end of Genesis 2, it says that they were naked and they knew no shame, which is a description that you and I can't fathom. That's an experience that we have never had. Because the history of the relationships between the human race, within the human race, between men and women, is one of use and allowing ourselves to be used. Or as a woman, and I think only a woman can say this, so just know this, that I'm quoting a woman here. She says, so the temptation, by and large, is for men to lust after women. And the temptation of women is to desire to be lusted after. It's a great insight. Because we're all insecure, right? We look so put together and accomplished and whatever, but we're insecure as hell. So that's the result of the fall. The first result of the fall is this distortion of sexuality, and they know shame suddenly, and so they hide from each other. That gives us an insight into the fact that the enemy tries to use this area as a primary area to go about his work, which is to destroy us. That's his goal. His goal is to enslave and then ultimately to destroy us. That's how we got into the mess. Okay, that's the bad news. If I don't know the bad news, the good news just doesn't seem like all that good, quite honestly. But that's bad, and what's worse about that is there's nothing we can do to get out of that. And the easiest way I know how to explain that is the passage in Romans 7 when St. Paul says, the good I want to do, I don't do. And the things I hate, I end up doing. Anybody relate to that? like an hour ago, right? So that's the situation of the human race. We are, by our own doing, sold into slavery. It has lots of ramifications, but one of the most drastic, devastating ramifications is the relationship between the sexes and the distortion of sexuality. And just pick up an electronic device and see for yourself. Or actually don't. Don't do that. Because you won't get out of it. How do we get out of it? Well, here's how we get out of it. We get out of it by God invading this kingdom, by coming in disguise for the purpose of going to war. So the second person of the Trinity, the eternal Son of God, through whom all of creation was made, to rescue you and me, becomes flesh. And he doesn't become flesh to tell stories, and he doesn't become flesh to do miracles, and he doesn't become flesh to see what it's like to be a human. He becomes flesh to fight and to rescue us. And so for me, the analogy that was really helpful for me going into Holy Week this year was D-Day. And so if you look at pictures of D-Day and you see the Allies and their landing crafts and the doors open up and these guys come rushing out, they're not rushing out to get to like Champs-Élysées and have some coffee in Paris, right? They're rushing out to go to war to liberate a continent which is enslaved by a tyrant. In a similar way, God becomes flesh to fight. But here's what the early church would always say, that it is only fitting that the deceiver should himself be deceived and bring about his own destruction. So we look at the cross or the crucifix over here, and it's easy for us to think, and even though so I'm going to say this out loud, and we're like, well, I don't think that, but a lot of us live this way. We look at that and we go, oh my gosh, what a tragedy. You know, it's like King or Lincoln or some other martyr. But what we need to firmly get, and this is significant, I think, for what God wants to communicate to us with regards to fearlessness, is that's not a tragedy, that's the point. He wants that to happen. And so I shared with some folks on Holy Thursday this image that God gave me. I think this is the coolest image God's ever given me, of why he wants that to happen. So the image is of an ambush predator. I've never heard of an ambush predator in my life. I was praying one day before Mass with the kids in the school, and I felt like God just gave me, like literally just said, look up ambush predator. And I went, okay. So I Googled ambush predator, and all of a sudden up comes this description. I went, that's you, Lord. Wow. So an ambush predator is, it could be it's like a spider or a crocodile or all sorts of things that exist in the woods or at your home or in the seas. They're creatures which they lie still in disguise so as to entice their prey. So that when the prey gets close, they can pounce on them. That's Jesus. See, Jesus on the cross, this is what he's doing. He's hiding his divinity. If the devil can stand in front of him, and he is, as he's here, this is someone who, in the devil's eyes, right, you've been intriguing until now. You've done some pretty remarkable things. You don't sin, that's rather unusual, but neither does Mary. But son, you're basically skinned alive. You're crowned with thorns. You're naked. You're nailed to a cross. You're utterly humiliated, and you're about to die, which means you're about to be mine. And the Lord wants that. So if you can picture, it's almost like the Lord, he wants to be swallowed so that death will consume him, so that from within he can destroy death. Do you get that? Does that make sense? So the way one of the early fathers of the church would say that to rescue us, the Lord, the second person of the Trinity, he goes in search of a chariot so as to go into hell, so as to liberate hell and to destroy the devil. The chariot is his flesh, because God can't die. So he takes flesh to go into hell to do what? To undo these dominions which ever since the fall have held the human race bound, sin and death, which is best understood as capital S and capital D. We tend to think of sin as things we do and don't do. That's true, but sin is first and foremost a power against which you can't win, or you couldn't until that. But when he rises from the dead, he rises from the dead pulling with him all of those who've been held bound by the enemy. And the way he says it in Matthew 12, Jesus binds the strong man, that's the devil, so as to rescue all those things which the strong man has been holding in his own possession. That's us. So what looks like this massive conflict that's about to happen between God and the devil, and between Jesus and Satan and the kingdom of life and death, turns out to be no contest at all. Jesus takes his cross, he smashes the door of hell, and he commands those who are in to come out, and in the process, he binds the devil. So Colossians, when St. Paul's trying to describe this is how Paul puts it. In Colossians, those shots kicking in, sorry.
I know, yeah.
Either that or it's the unsteady, I think it's the unsteady this. So here's what St. Paul says. He, Jesus, disarmed the principalities and powers. What are those? Sin, capital S, death, Satan, hell. He disarmed them, or you could translate it as he stripped them. They're naked now. Made a public spectacle of them, or humiliated them, triumphing over them in his cross. And the image Paul's using here, and this is why I shared this with us, the image Paul's using here is this is how the Roman Empire and the Roman legion worked. So the legion, the empire grows by the legion going out and conquering lands. And so, General Ioannis goes out into Thyatira, and I go to war against, the king of Thyatira, and I crush you, because I got the legion with me. So I crush you, I take you rather than kill you, I take you, I strip you, chain you, and I parade you through the streets of Rome, down the main street of the Forum, with all of the Romans there. And there's a sign above you that says, "This is the one who once fought against us. Look at him now. He has no power over you. He's been utterly defeated." That's what Jesus has done. That's the one who brought you into each other's lives for a mission. That's the one who's entrusted to you your children. That's the one who's entrusted to you the task of forming them, of yoking with other families, of getting his world back. What Jesus has done is invade a kingdom by a stronger kingdom, namely his own. Jesus is not simply kind, people. He is. That's good. Jesus is insanely, unimaginably powerful. Who do you know who can say, "I once was dead, and now I'm alive"? That's the one who's trying to equip you before anything else with a confidence and a fearlessness as you go about the task of trying to raise your children in a culture which is a mess. No question. But what the enemy tries to do is use the mess to make you feel defeated, to give up, to just think you don't have a chance. It's hopeless. You're doomed. And the Lord says, no, the enemy's doomed. He's been defeated. And I'm with you. And so I felt like one of the things that the Lord wanted to say was, before we get into these other really practical things that Tim's got to share with us, here's the first thing to do practically. Take authority over your house. How do you do that? You pray together as a couple. Or if you can't do it as a couple, you pray as an individual. Jesus, I give you again this home, this family, our children. I ask you to reign here. These are your kids. We are yours. And we ask you to be present in all that we do. And then if you can as a couple, and some of us can't, and I know that, but if you can as a couple, so then you pray together and you go to war in prayer for your children. You take authority against those things in the name of Jesus, against those things which are trying to come against him. Some of us got kids already who are teenagers they're already addicted to porn, right? And you know it. Fight for them. In the name of Jesus, we come against spirits of pornography and addiction. And we command you in his name to leave here and to leave our son alone or to leave our daughter alone because you have no authority over him. He has been washed in the blood of Jesus.
And if I can add, and a great way of doing that is those of you who use Outlook or whatever, put this in as a daily reminder, and you can go online and find a great prayer of spiritual warfare, and you may be praying it for your kids, you may be praying it for yourself. I know one of my favorite, these chairs are funny. I'm going 50-50 odds that I'm on my face before we're done. Yeah, I mean, every time, whoa. So every time I lean forward.
He face planted like right in there.
I know, wow. He wasn't kidding about the shots. There's a little book here called The Miracle Hour, and I brought some with me, and I sell them at a loss. Karen and I buy them. We just buy big boxes of them, and then when I go on the road, I sell them. Great spiritual warfare prayer in here, but other prayers too. But set it up so that, every day, imagine the power of that. Every day you're praying these kind of powerful prayers for your kids and for you. I mean, it's not true for me or you, but I imagine there's one or two people here who aren't fully healed sexually. So if anyone here has that struggle, or if you have a friend, that's supposed to be a joke. You think that's really true? I know, right? So the deal is, every day that part of your life, whatever part it is, and that's sort of sexuality, is sort of that trick that gets played on us. Like it needs the presence of God to be healed and redeemed. You can't do this with willpower. You can't. You may have tried. You can't. So to continually invite Jesus into the center of your sexuality, put that on your Outlook every day. Jesus, by the way, again. And you may go for a great run for a while, and then you don't even know why. It's like, dang, what just happened? Just come back. Because Satan wants you to say, see, that's because you're just a loser. You'll never get this right. And that's why you'd better not talk to your kids, because you're like a loser. And if you talk to your kids, you're going to make them a loser, and they know more than you anyway. So just stay quiet and go work on your landscaping, because that's what really needs you, right? So that's Satan talking, and the answer is no. No, Jesus, into the center of this. I invite you into the center of this. Bring your light to the center of it. Help me see this with your eyes. You are the king of my life. You're the king of my wife's life. You're the king of my family. You're the king of my home. And I invite you to take full authority in whatever that means. Even the part of me that's reluctant to invite you, I surrender that to you too. Like, that's the way to pray with powerful prayers for your kids and family.
Yeah. Now you know what I'm talking about. That's just truth. And that simple truth is something that God, I think, just wants us to soak in tonight.
Yeah.
He is not anxious about your children. I understand that you are.
Yeah.
He's not. He has no rival. No one can contest with him. When he speaks, demons flee. They have to at his name. So use those things which are already given to you as disciples, and perhaps which are latent for some of us, and we haven't done. Mm-hmm. Just pick up the weapons and fight, and then we'll go to the tools, which I know you got a boatload of stuff to share with us. So,
but this is it. Yeah, this is it. And I think so that what we're talking about tonight is taking back ground. And you might just want to notice what you came here with. And if I were to say, what are you looking for tonight? Jesus, I love Jesus. This is a great question. You think I can heal you? Or what do you want me to do? Like, I don't know. Like, to start with your desire, what do you want? And then notice, how confident are you that you can really just kill this with your kids, like really get this right. And to the extent that you don't feel confident, I would guess that's because of all the ground we've given away in our culture and in our families, and we haven't even known how to take it back always in the church. And so that's what we're here to do tonight, is take back the ground. And that's first and foremost, isn't it? Is realize I'm taking this ground back.
So totally, we got this map of the city of Detroit behind. No, we don't. We got this map of a city behind us. All right, so
Not sure what city that is.
maybe once I faceplant, we'll figure that out. So anyway, yeah. So we've got this map here. So the image of a what am I looking at? Columbus.
Wow. Well, I just want to thank you for coming tonight.
Oh, wow.
It's been a good night.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Because I don't do
Go
Columbus.
blue.
I don't.
You might have noticed the colors in the late night.
It's true.
What are we doing here?
That's right.
Wow, in the name of Jesus, I take authority over this picture. So, but this is a helpful thing. So I've had this image of a map. You're talking about taking ground. That's been exactly the image for Easter for me. I just see a map of my life or our marriage, our family, and it's under occupation, different areas, by the enemy. And what the Lord wants to do is he just wants to invade the map, and he wants to start taking territory back. And the first step is just to ask him to show us what's under the possession of the enemy right now. Like, where are you not reigning here? So if there's flags above each of these buildings with big, maize M's, gosh almighty. So we take down the enemy's flag, we take down that scarlet and gray, and then we host the maize and blue, and boom, now the Lord's king there, right? So, Lord, where is the enemy reigning? And then we just want to see him take the flags down and put his lordship there. Mm-hmm. And you can't do it all at once. So you ask him to show you, okay, show us what's the most important ground to take back now? Where do we get a beachhead? Mm-hmm. Just like at D-Day. And then you go from there. But God wants to and can do this in your families. And we just need to trust him and let him. And the tools that you got, there's a way for us to cooperate that. But the first step is just to know, hell doesn't have a chance. Mm-hmm. You don't have a chance with my child. He's washed in the blood of Jesus, and Jesus humiliated you. So get away from him.
Amen. It's about that. It's about that's where the battle is. That's where the most important battle is. And I've known people who've tried everything and tried other therapists, and they come to me, which is a sign they're really desperate. And they show up in my office, and I get 15 minutes into the session, and I'm like, man, I got to find you a good therapist. And then I realize, I'm a therapist, and I'm like the third one they've seen. But really, in those moments, you say, well, how are you praying for your family? How are you praying for your son that's been going through all these terrible things? And very often they're like, well, we're trying to get the behavior modification right. And I think, well, those of us who are parents know the behavior modification just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, I think you should keep paying me to give you these strategies, but they're never going to work. What really works is when I say to them, why don't you at night after you put all your kids to bed, why don't you just go stand outside their room and bless your kids and call down heaven on your kids. And why don't you wake up 15 minutes early and before anyone's awake, get rid of all those demons, because you've experienced those demons, haven't you? First thing in the morning, when the big fights happen, it's like, wake up, I told you, right? Like that. Instead, wake up, have some time to pray, cover your house in prayer, so when they meet you, they've met a prayed up parent, and then we can see how things change. It's really the ground. It's the ground of everything. And it will even tell you what to do next, your prayer will. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for indulging that, and thanks for jumping on it.
Sure.
You got a lot to share, I know, and we got a hungry crowd who wants to just kind of pick your brain and learn some wisdom. What's on your heart as you want to share this with us? I know you've got some strategies and whatnot.
Well, the good news is you have a handout, and you don't need to look at it now, but you have you're right. Yeah, that doesn't work, does it? Yeah, you have a thing. Don't think of what's in that folder. Don't even imagine how interesting it might or might not be. It's in there, and don't look at it. This is sort of like, teaching on the way we teach our kids about sexuality. So this is going to be the most incredible, don't think about it. This is the most incredible thing. Let me tell you about sex. Don't think about it, but I want to tell you how great it is, yeah. What I'm saying is you have your resources there, and you really have a guide, but I want to highlight a couple things that you'll find on there when you go back over it. Here's the big picture. Would that be all right if we just say, let's just create a big picture here. The question is, how do we cultivate healthy sexuality in our kids? That's the big question. So I came to that question probably 18 years ago when I was realizing we were going to have to talk to our kids. And I said, all right, time to get the book. Well, it turned out there wasn't a book. I mean, and the books that were out there were all this thick. And by the time you got to the end of them, it was like, okay, but what do we say? What do we not? So I just started taking notes. And before long, I had a handout. And I was like, wow, I should put this together. So I did. And then I put a DVD together of talking, how do you talk to your kids about sex? But the essential parts of it are with you here. But in the big picture, we want to be really clear talking to our kids about the human and spiritual meaning of sexuality. And we want to do that when they're early adolescents, if we can, because early adolescence is the key time. On the surveys that the parish filled out, it was, you said, when's the best time to do it? The surveys were about right, a little late. What we did in our family was we talked to our kids when they were 9 years old. And that sounds really young. And it's like, why would we do that? And people say, doesn't that spoil their innocence? And the reality is, it doesn't spoil their innocence. In fact, now you can talk to them about sexuality in a way that doesn't create all this anxiety, which feels like a spoiling of innocence. I could tell you the stories from our kids. So funny, their reaction to this thing. They were just like, wow, really? That's what? No way. Okay. I won't retell the Smarty Jones story.
No, please don't.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
But they, you can ask me after. I'll tell you the Smarty Jones story. So very interesting. Kids when and this is one of the questions that came up on this survey. So I'm just going to answer right now. When and why? Around early adolescence is what the Conference of Catholic Bishops in the United States say. In the United States, early adolescence is the right time, given the cultural realities that we're all battling. So, it's in this book. They tell you when to say everything. And why is that? Because at 9 years old, kids have enough mental development. They're in concrete reasoning. So they're no longer in magical reasoning. Most 9-year-olds don't believe in Santa Claus. And as I say that, I'm sorry if I just ruined that for some of the parents in the room. But they don't believe in Santa Claus. They think very black and white, very concrete. So it's a good time where you can actually tell them, and you can plant this foundation. The second thing is, at 9 years old, if you go through the process, which I outlined in the handout, where you actually take time as mom and dad, you go out, you hang out with them, maybe get a meal with them, maybe go to a park with them, let them feel really connected with you before you start talking about this thing, they will receive this in a very relational, spiritual kind of way. So it plants well. It's not that an awkward conversation saying, hey, Johnny, come in here. We got something to share. And he's like, what's with the pictures? Like, we'll get to that. And then the last thing is, 9-year-olds generally still like us. They haven't entered adolescence. And, it's sort of easier to have a conversation like this with someone who likes you. And so now, and then you're sitting here saying, my kid's 14, 15, 16, 17, they're not going to want to talk, right? So now, what do you do with that? The answer involves wine. Not for them, but for you. Or maybe for, I don't know. No, not for them. But if that's the case, then you take a spirituality of sexuality, you clarify, and we're going to talk some about that. What does it mean to have a spirituality of sexuality? What does it take to meld these worlds together that in our world are so separate? And you write down what are the main things you want them to get. And then ask yourself, do you have people in your family who might be really good examples of what you're trying to teach, and people in your family who might be, shipwrecks, like their life is a disaster? Well, now you can redeem that story because you're going to say, or it could look like this, right? So that was and even for Karen and I, and I had done this, I had written it, I was working with a publisher, it was going to be a book, turned into a DVD. I had really thought it through and really each thing developmentally, getting it just right. And it was time to talk to our oldest. And Karen and I sat down and said, well, it's time to talk to Shannon. And we were terrified. I was like panicking. I mean, we sat down to have a drink and work out exactly what we were going to say to her. And 1 turned to 2, turned to 3. I mean, we were just like really having a rough time with it. And then when we went to talk with her, I felt like I was trying to break up. When you're in high school and you're trying to break up with your girlfriend and it happens like 5 times, it's like, I want to break up with her tonight. And you're walking and it's like, nice shoes. And then you get to the end of the night and you don't break up with her. It was like that. Like it was really hard. But we did it. And we're so glad. And the feedback afterwards was great. And then we had a foundation that we could build on. Can I tell one quick story? because here's the gold in it. And I did tell this last year, but I'm going to repeat it this year because this was the gold. After we told our oldest the whole spiritual meaning of sexuality and the whole bit, which is in your handout, then that was in October. We're now holidays, and my family had come to town. Love my family. Love my cousins, my nieces, nephews. They had all come to town. Britney Spears was big, and things were in the news, and so we heard them. We heard them upstairs talking really explicitly about what was going on in these lives. Like, it was a very explicit talk about who was having sex with whom. I should say this first. When you tell your kids, when you get done with the talk, what you say is, now you know more than just about anyone else your age. So we don't want you sharing this with anyone else. This is what it really means. This is what lovemaking is about. It's so amazing, so sacred. It's the way in which God brings human life into the world. It's set apart. It's different than anything else you'll ever do in your life. It's that cool. But don't tell other people, because other people don't get it. And they call it weird things. And when they call it weird things, and you could use some of that language if you've heard your kids use it, when they call it that stuff, it just means they don't know. And it's sad they don't know. And it's sad that so many people walk around not knowing. But don't correct them. Just know you know way more than they do, okay? Great setup. So we come upstairs because the talk had gone on too long, and I'm like, I got to put an end to this. So I come up. Everyone is like quiet. They look at me, and I look over at Shannon, and she's looking at me like, you're right. They don't know. Oh, my gosh. They don't know what it really means. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And Karen and I went back downstairs, told Karen, I said, that's it. That was a confirmation from God that we need to keep taking back this ground. We can do this. I mean, we can give this ground back to our kids.
That's awesome. Thanks for that.
Yep.
You talk a lot. There's so many great things that you lay out in the handout and whatnot, but you talk at one point about sexuality. What we're trying to do is not to eliminate or to gratify desires. We want to transform them.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
So it might be relevant for some of us.
Yeah, no,
might be relevant for me.
No, I mean, right? This is like, and maybe one or two other people here.
Maybe.
So the question is, and I think what I'd like to do is show you, the question is, underline this, and we got to say this today. What is sexuality?
Right.
What do we mean by sexuality? And I made up a new formula for everyone to look at today, and you'll see the model most of us grew up in thinks of sexuality as being this formula that starts with, sexuality is basically a biological drive to have sex. And then what we add onto that is, is a morality that says, we tell our kids, now this is what it is. It's a drive to have sex, but no. No.
Don't think about it.
Don't even think about it. And you know how you don't control yourself? Just control yourself, would you? It's all about self-control. That's what we've had. In fact, here's how you know you got raised with this. When I was growing up, when I was 15, I had a book laying on my pillow when I came to bed one night, and the book is called Almost 13. So it was 2 years late. I was going to talk to my dad about that. He seemed good in math and everything else, but this book arrived late. And it was nice. It was kind of like, this is all the confusion, chaos, and craziness you just went through for the last 2 years. I was like, oh, thanks. Now I have a name for it. But what that book said was, it had these pictures these pencil diagrams of little children becoming adults. And you started with these very low muscle kids, like stick figures almost. And then muscles started developing. And then you got the squiggly lines, underneath the armpits, and secondary sex characteristics, as we like to say to our kids when they were adolescents and wanted to make them feel awkward. As they would grow, what it would say is, in the book, it would say, sooner or later, hormones are going to start flowing, your body's going to change, and you're going to want to have sex. But you can't have sex, right? So what they were doing, and then they would, and so this book would kind of give this model, right? Like, it's all about your desire to have sex. You can't have sex, so control yourself. That was the model. Anyone else experience anything like that? Was that kind of the model you got?
Yep.
Yeah, that was mine. And then, the question is, how's that working for you? Was that enough? And of course it wasn't enough, because that's not what sexuality is. You open the Bible and you don't find, Jesus said, and then when they turn 13, we'll give them secondary sex characteristics, and boy, won't that be a riot, because they're not going to be able to survive this at all. Chapter 17, they didn't survive that well at all, did they? That was a shipwreck if there ever was one. No, what it says in the Bible is God creates us from the beginning as males or females. Like there's two kinds of image bearers. And I like to say as a Notre Dame fan that, the two kinds of people in the world are not Michigan fans and Notre Dame fans. Because the sin didn't come into the world till later. So that's when Michigan fans were born, yeah. Sorry.
Thanks for coming.
Sure. It's been nice. Thank you for having me. A little short. So we
Stop payment on the checks, Andy.
That's right. So we really want to look at the model. And so what we need is not a biology of our sexuality. We need what we call a theological anthropology. And what anthropology is the study of humanity. We all took anthropology and we studied native, these humans in different cultures. And the question is, what does it mean to be a human? And how do we look different? Well, we need to ask that question through the lens of Scripture, which is something we really haven't done all that well until St. John Paul kind of said, hey, why don't we start looking at it like this? Why don't we start looking at what does it mean to be human? And what it means to be human is that we have this core longing for love. None of us feel complete until we are experiencing love with God and with each other. That's what it means to be sexed. The word comes from, if you cut off a branch from a tree, you sex that branch from the tree. That's what the word means. And so we all are branches of a tree that have been cut off from our source, and we're aching to reconnect with that tree. And I think we can relate with that. And even people, people are great, and my marriage is amazing, and it's amazing and good, and yet there's still an ache. At the end of the day, there's an ache. I'm guessing you've had that feeling once or twice.
A couple times.
Once or twice, yeah. The ache that never feels complete. And the important thing is what sexuality is this core longing to love and be loved that reveals God's presence to the world. There's something about gender that reveals and love when we're together that reveals love. I had this really cool experience that is unusual in the conversation about sexuality, but I was down at the Rensen, and I was going to talk to the ministers of the Archdiocese of Detroit. This was like 15 years ago. And I was talking about how we experience God's presence in one another. Good topic, right? I wasn't feeling great about it, so I got down there really early, went down to the food court and, got some, was going to get coffee and breakfast. And when I went into the bathroom, there was a homeless guy in there, and he started trying to make conversation with me. At which point, I was completely and totally annoyed. I'm like, what is this guy messing with me? I'm trying to get my head screwed on so I can talk about finding God's presence in human beings, and here's this guy totally messing with me. So, of course, he asked for money, and we have homeless people outside our clinic all the time, and we don't give them money. Like, that's just a rule. You don't give them money. You give them anything else. You put them in your car and take them to rehab, but you don't give them money. So I'm like, I'm not going to give this guy money. But he seemed decent, and he said he was hungry, and I said, well, look, I'm going to get breakfast. I'll buy you breakfast. So we went and got breakfast, and we sat down, we started talking. Turns out, he knew people I knew in the city. Turns out, he hadn't been homeless for a long time. He had all kinds of bad things happen, got an addiction, divorce, medical bills. Next thing you know, he can't rent anywhere, and so he's on the street. A very normal human being. And as we're breaking bread there, and I'm making eye contact, I had this overwhelming sense, God's presence is right here. I'm encountering the Spirit of my God in this man. Like, this is Jesus with me having breakfast. And it was really humbling because I was really annoyed, that he was interrupting my life as preparing to speak. But I think that's what it does, when we see love. We think of our parents. I know you've talked about it with yours. I think of mine, who've, hurt each other and forgiven over and over and over. They get to the end, and you see those old couples walking, and you're like, that's a picture of God's love. It's not just like Cancun. It is like deep and rich and like they really sacrificed for each other and blessed each other, and even when they didn't like each other. So that's what sexuality is about. It's this powerful, sacred revelation. So is there any doubt that Satan wants to come after our sexuality and try and steal our confidence and cause our kids to be confused about their gender and about what they want and don't want? And is there any question about? Of course that's going to be the first target that the kingdom of darkness comes for. So, and then the second thing that I think is important, what we add to that is not just a moral theology of it's all about when you do or don't have sex. It's really about what I call like a spiritual theology of transformation, because we have to work with our longings. And, one of the things we find, we work with a lot of guys who are recovering from sex addiction in our clinic, and one of the most important things they need to do at some point is learn, what's this about? When you have a stirring for love, you have to decode it. You can't just shut it down. You can't just try and eliminate it, like good luck trying to eliminate it. And you can't just gratify it and think it's going to go away. No, it's going to get bigger. When you gratify, as most of us know, anything like that gets bigger. we have to find a way to transform our longings. And here's a picture of that, if that's all right. And then, I've been mentoring a guy for a long time. His name's Jim. He was our next door neighbor, and his dad died. And so I decided I would be his confirmation sponsor, just kind of walk with him through life. So I got to be with him from the time he was little until now he's an adult. But at one point, he was off at school. He came back, and I hadn't seen him in a while, so we're driving around, and the radio's on, and Alanis Morissette comes on. So I turn on Alanis Morissette. I kind of turn it up, and I think I'm going to have my cool moment with him because I'm an old guy. But I'm like, hey, Jim, you've heard of Alanis Morissette? I love Alanis Morissette. And he said, oh, man, love her. I want to do her, man. And I said, oh, like have sex with her? He's like, yeah. And I'm thinking, man, as a confirmation sponsor, that was my shining moment. Like he just
did an awesome job.
He has it. Like I'm done. Like he's got the whole thing right there. It's just flowing. His respect for women has never been better. So I said, no kidding. And then at the moment he regretted the conversation, I began to say, well, tell me about that. He said, what do you mean? I'm like, well, what do you think that would be like? And what do you think it'd be like the next day? And how would she be different if you had sex with her? But how would you be different as a man? How would you feel about yourself as a man if you had sex with her? And he began getting very confused. And then I said, you know what, Jim, let me throw something else by you. What if instead of having sex with her, and I said, yeah, just try and fantasize that maybe Alanis wouldn't want to have sex with you the first night that you're with her. I don't know. I know it's unheard of, but maybe. I said, what if instead of that, because Jim obviously had a lot of wounds with his dad dying and stuff, so he was a big musician, and I said, what if you and Alanis went up to your flat with your guitars and you just played music and you asked her to play some of her tunes and said, tell me about the story behind that song, it's so deep. And then you played a song and told her about your dad, and you just went back and forth, and then you went to Starbucks and got like super venti, like 6-shot like lattes, just totally wired, and stayed up the whole night talking. And then maybe on the couch, she kind of fell into your arms and you fell asleep and you woke up a few hours later. What would that be like to say goodbye to her? How would that be? And he said, that would be unbelievable. So I said, so now what do you want? And he said, actually, I'd still like to have sex with her. I said, okay. So it wasn't a one-session intervention that worked. I'm just being honest. Most people tell stories and they embellish it. And then he fell on his knees, and I think the Spirit anointed him, and next thing you know, he's now the bishop of Syracuse. That didn't happen. However, we got into a good conversation, and what I was able to share with him is, and what I said to him is, because I'm mentoring him, I said, look, man, you are a man, and you are wired to come into this world and join the invasion for God, and you're here to go to war for the hearts of women. And my guess is what draws you to Alanis Morissette is she's got this great projected picture of herself. She's a wounded woman who's been violated by men, and she feels like she's got no one to protect her. And I said, just consider the possibility that what you really wanted was to come and rescue her, and that part of that deep down you wanted to rescue her. Now you live in a world that says, if you're going to be close with someone, well, you ought to think about having sex with them. You're going to rescue someone, well, when it's all done, you're going to have sex, right? Like we live in this world with all this confusion around what makes us feel close. And that's what I mean by we need a spiritual theology. Like we need to start making sense, for guys who come to me and they're like, man, I see girls jogging and I just get so distracted. I say, well, what is it about that? It's not so simple. It's not just lust, and there's something more. There's a life you're longing for. There's something you're missing. You got to bring it to God and say, God, what is this emptiness I'm trying to fill with that so that I can more effectively bring it to you? That's what I mean by spiritual theology. That's
awesome. Huh? Mm-hmm. And as I'm listening to you talk, it's just making me think. So we're talking about trying to reclaim our families. Mm-hmm. And in order for me to do that, right, the first thing I got to do is I got to let God reclaim me.
Absolutely.
And if you're a parent, unfortunately, you got to do it simultaneously, right? So I'm hoping that one of the things that comes out of the conversations that we have and the context that we create to do this is that it just arouses a longing in our own lives too, to just go, gosh, wouldn't it be great to be freer?
Yeah. And what does that look like, which is the third thing, which I think rather than talk about self-control, we need to remember that we have all these spiritual riches and spiritual disciplines. And so the question is, if you're here saying, you know what, I need to up my game. Like my sexuality, I have shame or I have pain or whatever. Just what's one thing you can do differently? Maybe it's... I need to get to Mass a little bit more regularly. I need to experience more more of the sacraments with God. Or maybe it's, I need to just wake up every day and pray about it. That's the one thing I need to do is invite God into it. Just those are the kind of disciplines that could be really helpful just to add one thing, and the same with our kids. What are little spiritual disciplines we can practice so it's not overwhelming?
I know Sandy's going to want us to take a break. It's 20 after 8. We want to try to get some questions from people. I just want to direct your attention to the blue folder, which he told you not to look at. So take a look at this real quick. And so doctors, how to talk to your child about sex. If you flip it to the back, you'll see a directed or further reading list, and then just flip one page in, so it's page 9. And what I love, there's a lot of great things in here, but one of the things that I love is you've got an opportunity for us here to concretize something in an action plan.
Yep.
So I want to encourage us, before we leave tonight, to put something down there. So see that page 9 action plan? 3 things I will do within the next 3 months are. And if you're a couple here, you can do it as a couple, great. If you're an individual, do it as an individual. But I would beg you not to leave here without at least putting one thing in there. Maybe it's that awesome image of, it was a great visual, right? Of just kind of like standing outside your son or daughter's bedroom at night with the door closed and just praying over the room, or waking up and doing the same thing before the children wake up. Well, I'll tell you, you do that every day for the next week, come back and tell us whether or not something changed. Because something will change. God's going to honor that. And the enemy won't, he'll put up a fight, don't get me wrong. It'd be wonderful if the fact that the resurrections happen, we don't have any battles left, but we got lots of battles, right? We know that. But that's going to make a difference. So maybe that's something you write down, and that you do it as a couple, or maybe it's something else that something gets triggered tonight. But leave here with something in hand. We're going to do at least that to help take back the land in our family, huh? We were talking last night in RCIA about this a little bit. I mean, let me just tell you, as a pastor, first of all, I'll share something with you, and then I'll maybe ask you to share both as a dad and then as a psychologist. I would beg you not to give your kid a smartphone. I would beg you not to give your kid a smartphone. They don't know what to do with it, or they know exactly what to do with it. If you gave me a smartphone at 12, good night. I mean, good night. Your child, boy or girl, it's either, right? Because I hear as many, virtually as many women or girls struggling with pornography as men and boys. It's ubiquitous. And if the question comes back, well, don't you trust me? The answer is, are you kidding? Of course not. Absolutely not. I don't trust you. You cannot put a device like that into a child's hand and expect them to be able to handle it. It just won't work.
What I said to my son, who we really believe didn't have an issue, of course, every parent believes that, so just work with me. But what I said to him was, we have absolutely no reason to think you have any problem whatsoever. But let me just tell you, this is a rule in our house. We use a software called Covenant Eyes. I pay $15 a month, and it's on every computer that I own, which includes, actually, he bought his computer, but we still have Covenant Eyes on his computer. And it's just on all the computers that we own. And I say, as a man, I have Covenant Eyes on my computer. Do I struggle? Am I tempted? Not really. But I also know that if I go on, that report's going to go out to someone I really care about, and I'm not going to trust that. So what it does is it monitors everywhere you go. And if they go to somewhere that's like suspicious, then it will send, at the end of the year, or at the end of the week, it'll send a report, and you go through the report. So I get a report every week on my son's and computer. It's really, and you can put it on phones, you can put it on everything. And they send great resources, great articles about how to think about this thing. But it was a hard conversation. It was a really hard conversation with him. I was really afraid he was going to think I was accusing him of looking at pornography. And I knew that would crush him if he thought I was accusing him of looking at pornography. So I just said, this is just what we do in our house. I have it on mine. I'm putting it on yours.
So follow up to that. So what about a kid who you try to start to have the conversation with that? So especially in a single parent household. Mm-hmm. So maybe you got a mom and a boy. Mm-hmm. So I'm the mom. I'm going to try to tell you now. We're going to have this conversation. I'm going to try to tell you what we're going to do here, and you look at me and go, "I'm not talking to you about that."
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. So the strategy, you need to, this is one of those hard conversations. You need to put some strategy into it. So if sexuality, and someone asked for more description of what that is, if sexuality is this core longing to love and be loved, then that means all of our relationships we're having as, they have a sexual dimension to them, not a genital dimension to them, but a sexual dimension to them. So one of the best defenses we have with our kids to help them be sexually healthy is to love them really well and stay in their world. That's one reason why the handout in your folder on special times is there, because when kids are young, if we can spend a lot of time with them, interacting with them, they will internalize who we are. You know, it's almost as if we were made in the image and likeness of a God who was relationship, almost as if we were made in the image and likeness of a Trinity or something, because we become who we are in relationship. That's what it means to be gendered, to be sexual. So how do you have that conversation? You think it through, and I think you have to look at what messages you want to give and then say, how can I creatively teach these to him? That's number one. Number two, how can I pick the right time to do this? And it might take some serious planning. You might have to start like taking them out for coffee and just enjoying your time with them for a while until you feel the connection coming back. And then you can say, hey, we're going to go, but I want to do something special, and I have something special I want to share with you. And it's okay to start the conversation with, hey, you know what? The next 15 minutes might be kind of awkward. And I get that. And I've written out what I want you to know in a letter, and I'm going to give you that letter. But I also want to tell you face to face. If you're a single parent and you think the other gender ought to be involved in this, then you could be thinking about, is there a grandpa or grandma or some like a mentor or a godfather or godmother, whatever. If there's someone else who could support the conversation, you could write a letter and sign it, you know, godmother and father, or vice versa, right? And then, then you can come back to the conversation. But it's okay that it's awkward. Like, it's okay that it feels awful and terrible. But once you've said it, you've said it.
And the letter writing is a great thing to do, because the letter writing can't get interrupted.
Yeah.
And someone can go back to it. I mean, you're gonna give it to them. They're gonna go, oh, I'm looking at that.
Yeah.
But they will go look at it, and then you can revisit it in a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned Covenant Eyes. Other things that you recommend to people, other ways to. I mean, you can't take the phone back now. Most parents won't anyway.
No.
What else could you do?
Yeah. Well, I think again, things that have worked for us is you can tell them that, you know, at the end of the night, we're going to just do a new thing here, which we're going to all charge our phones here. And you know, one of the things we said to our kids is, look, you know, smartphones are kind of a big deal. I know everyone uses them, but here's the thing. We're going to restrict some of what you do on that phone. If you want to have a private conversation, don't have it texting on your phone, because we are going to monitor everything that's on your phone, just like we're going to monitor everything that's on your computer. If you talk on the phone, we're not.
Don't you trust me?
Yeah, I totally do trust you. What I don't trust is that this thing has access. Like, people can find you on this. We don't have the ability yet. This is our first shot at this. You know, we don't know how to guard. You know, we can't. None of us can say, well, I'm going to do what my parents did with me. Our parents didn't do this. Like, we don't have any model. We're figuring it out. And yeah, you may have to take a withdrawal from your relationship account with your kid. But to say, here's the new rule. If you want to use the phone in our house, and I do pay for it, and the bill's over $300 a month, by the way, we're gonna have you leave the phones here, and I'm gonna have access to look at your phone. And I'm not gonna be poking around too much, but the deal is, I just want to make sure nothing really bad's coming in. And with that goes, I don't want you erasing anything, like no deleting anything, any search history. And I just want you to know that I have a way of checking that. And so one way of checking that is if you get Covenant Eyes on it, Covenant Eyes will let you know when anything's been erased. So
you used to, would you still suggest this? You used to say that you would have your kids turn in their phones and they would be on the kitchen counter and they would charge during the night.
Yes.
So should an adolescent or a teenager have a phone in their room at night when they're in bed?
Yeah, I mean, no, unless you have some way of monitoring what's going on in that phone while they're in their room.
Thanks.
So yeah, I wouldn't.
Please don't do that.
Yeah, and we're gonna have a hard time, aren't we? Why? Because this culture kind of took over, right? And our kids know more than us. And you know, it's always awkward to say to your kid, "Now you leave that phone here. Hey, before you go to bed, can you show me how to put this app on my phone?" It's awkward, isn't it? It's like, you're the expert of that thing. Now leave it here. It's difficult. And you have to realize that, you know, we are at war. I mean, it is a war, and that's not to be dramatic, but there's a war, and this is an area that the war is really raging. And so to take back ground is difficult. I have to show you one of my favorite cartoons. It's the new college game show. It says, "I'm sorry." Can you read that from where you are? I'm sorry, Jeanette. While your answer was correct, Walter was offended by it, so he gets the point. And that's sort of the world we live in, you know? Because, I mean, someone was asking, like, what happens when the topic of homosexuality comes up? And I don't know about for you. For my kids, the topic came up when they came home and told us that kids I've known in their life for a long time have come out as gay. And they bring it up to us, and they bring it up to me anyway, and then they just study me like, you're going to be politically incorrect, and we're just waiting for it. Go ahead. Come on. Say that rude, backwards, you know, Middle Ages thing about sexuality so we know you're irrelevant. Am I right? Or maybe your kids are too young. Maybe the kids are too young. And someone asked about that. So can we talk about that, or did we?
Yeah, can I tee that up real quick? So
Yes.
I'll give you a story. The best thing I think you can do with regards to being able to talk to kids about homosexuality is learn yourselves. So I had a guy in my office, doesn't matter when, and he was totally ostracized from the church, or kind of walked away from the church. It was his own doing. And we got into it, and we'd been talking for quite some time, set of years actually. And I knew what the issue was, and it was this issue. So it finally came up, and he says, I'm just ticked at the church for teaching on homosexuality. I said, okay, do you know what the church teaches about homosexuality? And he looked at me and went, honestly, I don't know that I do. I said, well, you want to talk about that? And he goes, okay. So we opened up the catechism. There's a couple paragraphs. And then I started talking to him, and I said, so here's the essence of the church's teaching. So it'd be a lot like if I saw Tim grab that glass, and I knew while he was walking away that someone had dropped a light bulb and there was crushed glass in there, and I saw him grab it, and I went, whoa, don't eat that, or don't drink that. And you go, well, why? Well, because there's crushed glass in there. I don't want you to get hurt. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, thanks. So if I did that, I don't think anybody would describe that as an act of hatred or bigotry. I think that would be an act of love. I don't want to see you get hurt. Mm-hmm. So the essence of the church's teaching on homosexuality, of homosexual behavior, is exactly the same. If you use your head, if you're a doctor or a nurse, this will come easier to you, because the way I would explain it is go ask the doctor or the nurse for the book of benefits of anal sex. Oh, there isn't one. There isn't a book. There isn't a benefit. There aren't any. Oh, it's actually harmful. It's dangerous. It can injure you deeply. You could die. Oh, well, thank you for telling me that. Mm-hmm. There's a way to share that. First of all, to know that's okay. So this is a matter of careful thinking. That's what morality is. Morality is always a matter of careful thinking. It's not a question of belief. It's a question of thinking. So we want to use our intellect and our reason to understand why certain behaviors are either healthy for me or harmful to me, as opposed to right or wrong, which I think is kind of weighted language. Kids, like right or wrong to you, but it's not wrong for me.
Yep.
So the first thing I think we can do in the conversation, because it's going to keep coming up, right, is know ourselves, what it is that we think about the topic. And then find ways to have conversations which are always respectful. I mean, I got family members who are gay. Mm-hmm. Almost all of us do now. But you can, doesn't mean I don't love, doesn't mean I don't love somebody. I mean, I got family members who cohabitate too. I'm gonna love them too.
Sure. Yeah.
But if I get a chance and the conversation comes up, we might talk about it.
Yep.
And if it doesn't come up, we might not talk about it. It's not like I'm going to constantly talk to my cohabitating family members about, did you stop that yet? Hopefully we got something else to talk about.
Yes.
Right. And you may have to build the relationship, and it might take years to build a relationship before you actually talk about that. But know first what it is the church teaches, and then try to make sure that you get it, and can articulate it kind of quickly. That'd be the first thing I would say.
Absolutely, and also realize, one of the things, a book by Father Ron Rolheiser called "The Holy Longing" is one of my favorite books, and he had his chapter on sexuality I love. And one of the things he says is we start these conversations at a disadvantage because people have beliefs and presuppositions about what the church teaches and thinks that are just plain wrong. And I like the way he put this. He said, "Well, let me." A little experiment just to see. You can find out if this is true for you, right? So if I came here and I had 2 magazines with me, and one was Cosmo, and I said, oh, I borrowed this from Samantha on the way in, and Samantha is 32, single, dates a whole bunch of guys, travels the world, loves wine, she goes to yoga all the time, she's like sexually active, and then I picked up another magazine that's called Today's Christian Woman, and that was Mary. And Mary's been same age, but she's been married for 7 years and, has 3 kids and spends a lot of time at home with her husband. And then I said, Samantha or Mary, who's got the most lights out sex life? Like who's just really rocking it, who's satisfied? When I talk to teens, I have to, never mind. But like satisfaction varies for women. You might have an awareness of that. And if I were to say, come on, really, in our culture, who's the one that really knows the most about sex and is having the most sex? What are you going to think? Is it going to be the Cosmo girl or the Bible study leader? You're going to think the Cosmo girl, right? I mean, that's just what the world says. And the truth is that that's not. But here's what Father Rolheiser says about that. He says, spirituality and sexuality are divorced in our culture. The secular got passion and God got chastity. We, the children of divorce, like all children from a broken home, find ourselves torn between the two, unconsciously longing for them to come together. And I think that's our starting point. So often we think what it means to be religious is, the more religious and spiritual, the less sex you have, which is completely not true, because one of the most comprehensive studies in the United States said, their big finding was, those having the most partnered sex and enjoying it the most are married people. And of those married people, people who share a common spiritual commitment are having the most highly satisfied sex lives. So when I speak at Rainbows, which I've been doing for the past 14 years, I share this with them. And I said, you know that? They're like, what? I'm like, do you know who that is? They're like, what? No. And I say, it's your parents. And they look at me like, no. And I'm like, yeah, in fact, are you guys going to spend the night here tonight? They got the house to themselves? Wow. So I wonder what room they're going to end up in tonight, because they got the whole house. That'll be good. I know. It's true. They hate me. They just skewer me on. They're like, this is just wrong, Dr. Hogan. It's wrong. It's true. But isn't that true? Don't we have this idea? So when we come at this thing and we start saying things, we want to start talking about sexuality, people are like, oh, there goes the church again. All they know how to say is no. Okay, last funny image, when I met Father John West, who got me into this whole thing talking about sexuality, he said, you want to work with us? I said, sure. He said, well, I need you to read a few documents first. I said, that's fine. Let's meet for breakfast. Met for breakfast. I said, really? Leo's Coney Island over on M14, Sheldon. I sat down and he had a pile of documents this big for me, books and documents for me to read. And I said, wow, John, who knew there were that many ways to say no? Because I had the same bias until you start learning and you realize, no, it's about love, and it's about creatively loving loving in your state of life. And that's one of the things you'll see in the handout. One of the things you go through with kids is, let's talk about all the ways we love. And let's talk about our single friend. How does she love? Oh, she's got friends. And, we did this with our kids, and we had a wonderful woman who was our babysitter, and she was in her early 30s. And, Michelle's amazing. She loves, she travels. She got a group of people she goes to Europe with. She's so free. She can do anything she wants. And Karen said, okay, that's enough of the freedom thing. She's got it. But unlike me, I'm stuck in this house with you guys. But then we talk about your priest. Let's talk about Father John and how does he love? How do people love him? How does he experience God's love? And you go through that. The point of the whole deal is passionate, meaningful, robust, sensual love and connection. That's the point. That's what we have, that we are the light at the center of the city, that we know more about love than anyone. So then when you want to talk about homosexuality, it's like, okay, but we can't start with what are you going to say to your friend who just came out. What we got to start with is learning how to love is really complicated. And there's a whole lot of ways that we foreclose the process early on. And here's the reality. Homosexuality is a normal developmental season. And the gay lobby hates when you say that, but it is. There's a season of life, and you may remember it, where you more prepared, or preferred. Sorry, I should stop doing drugs before this. we prefer to be with the same gender, and we prefer pajama parties and wrestling and being with someone of the same. That's part of this a natural kind of narcissism of learning what does it mean and what do I look like and what do you look like and are you bigger, am I bigger? Like that's just normal. And society used to contain that, and we had functional ways to go through that. And then we would elicit heterosexual attraction later with dances and things. It's been part of culture. We've washed all that out, and now people go through that season, and I watch it happen, and it breaks my heart. And these kids come in to talk with me, and it's like, man, I don't even know where to start with you because what you're experiencing is so common and normal, but you've foreclosed. You've gone online, you've read the websites, and now you know that this is who you are, and anyone who says different is a bigot and out of the Middle Ages, and it's a hard conversation. But I think it starts by us not being ashamed to learn what the church is teaching and to love people more thoroughly and intensely than they're getting loved anywhere else.
Yeah, that's spot on. Thanks for that.
Yep.
As he's talking, it makes me think of a comment from Janet Smith. Some of you know Janet Smith, but Janet teaches sexuality and morality down at Sacred Heart Seminary, goes all around the world talking, and she was given a description about sexuality, much like you just did, and the guy who was interviewing her stopped at one point and says, whoa, do you think anybody gets what you're talking about? Mm-hmm. And she said, no.
Yeah.
No, I don't think. And she used an analogy. She said, I think it's like people who all their lives long have drunk really bad wine. And so their experience of wine is it gives you a headache, it's bitter, it's aciduous, whatever. And then all of a sudden one day you hand them, like a $180 bottle of Amarone, and you put it to your lips and you go, whoa, what is that? And you go, that's wine. That's wine? Yeah. Yeah. That's wine? I didn't know this existed. And our forget our kids, our collective experience of sexuality, grown up in the ages that we have, is a lot like that. So we have to first let the Lord reclaim this land in our own minds and imaginations and memories and experiences and the convictions. And then the more that happens, the easier it'll be for us to have some of the conversations. Because sometimes, in all honesty, we're having conversations with our kids and we're like, I know I'm trying to tell you what you can't do, but I want to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be a bad salesman or a bad saleswoman if you don't actually believe in the product.
Sure, and if you're feeling like, man, did I blow that in my life? How can I possibly tell you anything when I look at my history? And, I have good news for you. You do not owe your children a detailed sexual history of your life. In fact, if they ask you, well, did you and mom, or did you ever before, what you can say is, my whole sexual journey is between your mom and I. Like, we've worked that through, and if the day comes where it's appropriate, I'll share details with you. And of course, they might think that's, denying your denial, so obviously there must be a lot there, but and that's a great boundary to have with them too, to teach them you can set a boundary like that. So.
We got 3 minutes. I'm going to try to find a way with Sandy to make sure we can address these. Maybe we can put them we can put them down into a video format or a written format, and we can get them onto a website somehow that people can see. Can I put you on the spot? I want to ask you a question only because it comes up a lot of times in my experience with kids, much more than you all might realize. And it's rampant again today, and it's rampant because of pornography. How do you deal with the topic of oral sex?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so thanks. In the name of the Father.
That's right, that's right. I'm just feeling led to pray right now, Father. Well, here's one of my assumptions with people. One of my assumptions is that God has wired us in a certain way, and so people know the answer to that question, and so the answer is dialogue. Is to be able to dialogue and to be able to ask people, like, what do you think about it? And this isn't a sidestep. It's like, really, like, what do you think of that? And if people want to say, well, and I did have that dialogue with the same guy I was telling you about before, and he explained to me, well, that's not as bad as having, regular sex. That means you're just sort of close. You're not really close to them. But I think you have to at some point, you have to elicit, is there some sense? Like, here's one of the questions I'll ask for people. On a scale of 1 to 10, how okay is it? Like, or how bad is it? 10, is it a disaster? 3, it's just sort of bad. Like, to say, so are you the kind of person that wants to be known as someone who has oral sex a lot? And they say, no. Oh, why not? On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is it? They say, it's only a 3 or a 4. And then you can say, oh, okay, well, it's a 3 or 4. Yeah. Well, why didn't you say 2? in other words, you have some sense that it's not right. It's a technique called motivational interviewing, and it's very tricky. When people are mostly deluded about something, you do that with people who have addictions. They're like, how bad's your alcohol problem? Well, it's 3, 4, it's not really a 10. You say, oh, why didn't you say 2? And they're like, oh, because, my kids don't like me anymore and my wife's ready to leave. It's like, oh, okay, that's why it's not a 3. Okay, well, you want to tell me more about that? You want to tell me more about the part of you that isn't quite sure that it's okay? You want to tell me the part about you, and I'll ask people, when you get married, what do you hope your partner, that when you get married on that day, what do you hope they've experienced? Do you hope oral sex was their thing and they come to you with a history of people they have had oral sex with? Or do you hope that they're finding other wonderful, creative, fabulous ways of connecting and being, emotionally and psychologically connected with people and having a great time in life and partying hard and dancing well, but they're preserving something. They're waiting for their lifelong partner. Wouldn't that be something if you meet someone who knows how to love, but they've preserved something for you? There is something sacred about this. One of the things, and we can definitely get you these slides, about planning ahead. And one of the things I talk about with teens that's real helpful is you can talk about the power of pre-deciding. You don't wait until the last minute to make big decisions. You don't say, where are you going to college? Well, I was going to look at that the first week of August and then decide where I'm going to go this fall. You start thinking about it your sophomore year. So why not ask other big questions about what kind of person you're going to be in life? The problem is this exercise. The problem is, that we make most of the big decisions that stay with us the rest of our life in this period of life between 13 and 24. Which is a bit of a bummer. So this is just an exercise to walk through with your kids to say, what decisions you want to make, what kind of person you want to be, what kind of person you want to marry. Many of you put on the surveys about tell kids how important it is to marry someone Catholic. Help people think that through. What kind of person you want to marry? What do you think it's like when you're 40 years old, you got 3 kids, and you married someone who's a different religion? How do you think that goes? How does that work for family cohesiveness and holidays and praying together? How does that work? Well, let me tell you some stories about it. And the research is pretty clear. It's really great to meet someone within your faith.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you to everybody for the questions. We'll take what we haven't had a chance to get into, and we'll try to figure out a way to put that into some sort of codified response, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you. I'm personally just want to say thanks to Tim for coming out. He's come out a number of times to OLGC, and you are always both informative and entertaining, and I love it, man. So thanks. And he's a great brother and a dear friend and a great psychologist. Thanks.
Can I just say one quick thing? I know we do have to end, but I was in South Bend last weekend, and I was able to arrange for meetings that I had to have with the publisher to happen in South Bend. It just so happened, coincidence, that the spring game for Notre Dame football was Saturday. So who knew? I was right there. But while I was there, I turned on the radio, and there was this talk on the radio on sexuality and theology of the body. And I thought, you know what? This will be good to get a refresher before my talk on Friday. And I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. I know that voice.
I know
and
that
it's
guy.
this guy. He's, I was like, well, good. Good for me to be reminded. So it's just thank you.
Those are my slides, I think.
Yeah, I know, right? So thank you for all that you do to inspire and encourage and keep that light burning so people don't get even more lost than they are. So thank you.
My joy. Thanks. Let's give Sandy a hand for putting together tonight. Appreciate it. You do great work, sister. And again, big shout out to Pete for feeding us always so well every event we do here, and for all your crew. We're grateful for all the help. Thanks for all the support. Please continue just to tell people about these. I think they're great. They're inspiring for people just to see other parents come out. It just immediately helps you realize I'm not alone, and that's huge. We're talking about how to continue to do this. We want to try to live stream the next one we do in October. So we got people from a ways away. So, but it'd be great that way if it's bad weather or it's, you just want to do this on your couch or whatever, that's great. But it also gives us a chance to do some new things kind of interactively through media. So we want to continue to find creative and helpful ways to have these conversations with you. We want to hear your input. There's so much we could potentially talk about. So I know it's always like, shoot, I wish they talked about that. They didn't. So we want to. That's why we want to keep doing them. And please God, they're helpful. You wouldn't have come back again with as many if they weren't. So
Can I
talk
just,
about
Sandy got some of these. This is the Catholic bishops of the United States. They've written a summary of what the church teaches about sexuality, both what it teaches and when to share it with your kids. She got about a dozen copies here. If this is something that you have a small group, like a homeschool group or other parents, and you think you might do a study of it, feel free to come take a copy of it. I would also say if that Miracle Hour book made sense, I'll be over there. I have Miracle Hours that for a couple bucks, or just take them. I don't care. I have a CD, which, you know, I tell kids, this is called a compact disc. And what you do is you put it in an old stereo and it plays. But these are meditations I've done that are just to help you pray. If you struggle to pray or struggle to let go of resentment, I have those. These are like $5, or you can get it free on YouTube or Spotify. I should refine my sales pitch, shouldn't I?
Is this an 8-track here?
Yeah.
What's this?
I know, right? No, this is the old DVD. It's actually dated. I got to go to Hawaii this past year because Jesus really wanted me to be in Hawaii. And then when I got there, they said, you know, another island wanted me. Would you ever stay? And I said, well, you know, but for the sake of him who suffered for me, I will stay in Hawaii. So I did. But they said, you really got to redo that video. So I'll redo it. But it's the same information. But the cool thing, this is the thing I just got to say, sorry about this. This is a magazine we wrote about our counseling center. And here's the reality. This is all about me. My staff told me we'd never get rid of like 600 of these. And I said, yes, we will. There are 600 people who want to know about the counseling center. And we got rid of about 150. So I have extras at my desk. So I would love to not have to lie to them when I say that we actually ran out. So I'm done, really.
And grab ones. I know, I just know as a priest, we're always getting requests for counselors. For me, it's one of the most tricky things to suggest somebody to see somebody because it's an endorsement. And a lot of us have gone to different places, and sometimes it's been helpful, and sometimes it hasn't. But this guy and the work that they do at Grace is remarkable work. It's over on the east side, and since 696 is closed now, we'll see you in November. But when November comes, you might want to check that out. But pray for his work and for the ministry there. Anything you want to say over there? No, of course not. All right. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.